engine, right? So you get more lift at the cam, you get more output. Kind of the same thing along this line. When you hit that sharp-edged corner or pothole where the other units are struggling to move the oil from point A to point B, here oil flows past the piston through little orifices, metered orifices, under normal road conditions. But when you hit that sharp bump, this inertia ring lifts. And when it lifts, because I'm actually holding the shock upside down, but I'm doing that for a reason to show you how that little ring opens up, there's a huge hole that now opens up and allows all the oil to continue to flow from one side to the other. Fancy way of saying, rider in the saddle, swing arm on the pavement. Now, I will turn it right side up. This shock is the only shock that is important. It is important which direction it's installed. 412s, 430s can go either way. This technically can go either way. It can go rod end up, but it's not going to work anywhere near as what you've just spent a lot of money to get it to ride. So always remember this series, rod end goes down. A little better. When you're going over the smaller stuff, the oil flows through the orifices and does what it does best. But when you hit that large one, well, there's a sharp-edged bump or a pothole, that inertia ring will lift, allowing again all that oil to flow. Being spring-loaded, it is also velocity sensitive, and it knows. So again, you know, how quickly it's being compressed will determine how much it opens up internally. But more importantly, it also knows when it gets toward the end of its stroke. It'll slam shut. So you do not have that bottoming out like you might with some other design. You'll have a hydraulic cushion. You'll still get a jolt, but it is a cushioned jolt. So even in those situations where it's like, uh-oh, this is going to hurt, it's not going to hurt as bad. So let's get on and talk a little bit about air shocks, starting with the soft tail units. These, both the soft tail air tail and the air tail for the baggers are dual chamber shocks where the competition is all single chamber. Now what that means is you have control of bottoming or preload independent of ride height. A competitor's system being single chamber, if it's fully extended, it's pretty solid. And if it's fully lowered, it's pretty soft. It's just the nature of the design. It's a low cost, effective way to get the bike to go up and down, but controllability when it comes to preload for bottoming control isn't it, you're limited basically by where you are in the stroke, the height of the unit itself. Ours, because they're independent, afford you that adjustability. So you can set bottoming control and then set ride height control. And that's a key to remember. Always set bottoming chambers first, then the ride height chamber. Another plus feature for this series of shocks, not only is one shock dual chambers of air, the other shock is a traditional coil-over hydraulic unit. So if you ever have an air leak with one of our systems, this one in particular, where the competition, your tire on fender, this system will actually, by design, keep it up and want to even raise it back to its stock height, because we use air to lower it as opposed to where the others use air to raise it. So you got to back up to a backup. By design, you're adding air to lower it so it wants to go back up when you let the air out, and the second shock having the traditional coil over again helps support some of the weight. Is it going to be as good of a ride? No. Do we recommend you ride two up with it? No. But you're going to get home instead of waiting for someone to come with a trailer or a truck to take you back home. These are sold as shocks and compressor kit individually. So by steps, in case customer can't afford it all. These run about $750 retail for a pair, and the compressor kit's another $700. The compressor kit comes with a chrome coil cover, gauge built in the fittings, and pretty much plug and play. So it's, and the rest of the controls are at the coil cover. So it's a pretty stealth arrangement. While we're on this subject, I'm going to talk about it a little later, but I might as well mention it now. Number one complaint on this system is it leaks. And then you ask the consumer, well, how do you know it leaks? And they say, well, when I parked it outside at the bar, the gauge read 60 pounds, and when I came out, the gauge was only at 20 pounds. Our gauge is not meant to hold pressure. The outlet line from the compressor is a check valve inside. So when you energize the compressor, the valve opens, sends air to the shock and then to the gauge to let the consumer know how much pressure is in that chamber. As soon as you release the electrical charge going to the compressor, check valve slams shut. So the line from the compressor to the gauge, we don't care if it leaks out, because it's not leaking. It's just, you know, we could make it airtight and completely to the gauge, but that would just add cost. Again, keep in mind it's only a reference. Great answer to your customer then. Tell them to just wrap the compressor button to that chamber. If that needle shoots right back up to 60 pounds, guaranteed there's no leak. Now if you hit it and it only goes up 5 pounds, then we do have an issue. But again, just because the gauge drops in pressure reading doesn't mean there's a system leak. For those cost-conscious customers who still want to slam their bikes, the air dragger is an option available for them. It also starts out as a 13-inch shock. It will take you down almost the same to about 10 1/4 inches. But it's a single chamber. So kind of the rules of a competitor system apply. They're fully up is firmer than it would be, and fully lowered is a little softer than it normally would be. But we did do two upgrades internally. There is a coil spring, helper spring, so when it is fully extended, it doesn't take as much of air pressure to hold it up there like it would for a competitor, so you get a little softer ride. And then on top of the damper body, right in here, is a microcellular urethane bump stop, but one that allows for a lot of travel. And it's interesting, this shock, to my point where people will buy it because they want to slam their ride, and then they forget to raise it as they go down the road, they'll ride it on that bump stop. And then they'll say, that ride's pretty good. So microcellular urethane is like next to impossible to break or tear or break down.